Let me slide on in here, shall we?
Mm-hmm.
We'll give it just a quick second as we run to and fro the terminal over there. Because today on Overtime with Coach Blue and Athletic Director Marissa,
Hello.
we're feeling the magnitude of not having our producer in studio. Poor guy's got the recovery going from a broken collarbone and whatnot. So we're going to excuse producer Max today. That should be our excuse for not being on here for a while, but we've been wicked busy.
Yeah,
haven't we?
Summers are, besides our kids are home, we have lots of races and volunteers and lots and lots of events.
You know, it's funny because with my ADHD yesterday, you said, look, we gotta print out a physical calendar and write down these dates, much like a wall calendar or like one of those desk things. Remember those big desk calendars, right?
Yeah.
And I've hated those things forever.
I've had everything in our phone, but you still don't understand the magnitude of every single weekend we have.
I'm such an in the moment guy that like if it's, I have this next.
Oh, this is next. Instead of planning forward, I had to print it out just 6 months, write everything down, and then lay it on the carpet so you could see it.
I'll be honest with you. I was a little bit blown away at how much we've got coming up. And I'm like, so that's why people have calendars.
Yeah.
It's not just magically things just keep happening. It's we have to plan this stuff. So yeah. So, you know, we've been busy. Summer's always kind of a crazy time around here, but it's good because it keeps us out of trouble, keeps us focused on the program.
Yeah.
And really helps us, show, I guess, the world what we're capable of doing when we get some like-minded people in volunteer positions. And while we're at it, I want to thank all the coaches and the team captains and everyone who donates their time to Team Addict to Athlete. People often say, Marissa, that Addict to Athlete looks so big, but really it's because we have amazing volunteers that step up to the plate.
People behind the scenes that do a lot of work to make it that way.
Absolutely. And so, you know, we do have a lot to be thankful for with everyone who's helped Addict to Athlete up to this point and those who we haven't met yet. So welcome to the team. But Overtime with Coach Blue and Marissa, we want to talk a little bit about some topics that you, the listener, and the participants might need. And it's an opportunity to field some questions as it pertains to addiction recovery, mental health issues, recreation, family systems, what have you. I'm a licensed mental health therapist and an addictions counselor. Marissa is a recreational therapist and CEO of this little team here. So together, I think we have a few things of knowledge to dump on some of these folks.
We try.
So submit your questions if you'd like. And today we're going to have a great topic. But before we jump into that, Marissa, we got to pay homage and thanks because it's been a minute to our Patreon subscribers. These are they who believe in what we're doing here, have helped support on a financial level to help produce this podcast. And I'm telling you, it's helping immensely. We're able to get this podcast out a little bit further to those who need it.
Yeah.
And we couldn't do it without you guys. I'm excited to tell you too, there'll be another bonus episode dropping today. So you Patreon subscribers get another bonus episode. So who are they that we should pay homage to and thank immensely for their contributions?
We are so thankful for our super fans, Karen Hardy, Steve Riggs, Jerem Thurston, Tara Butson, Holly Davies, Scott Foster, Brett Frew, Chris Williams, Sensei KP Brown, Patrick Forsyth, Brock Ellerman, and Christy Case.
Awesome.
Then we have our rookies. We're thankful for Sherry Polson, Earl Dyer, Wendell Wood, Brad Waldron, Ron and D. Loesch, and Sione and Mary Unuk. And our pro level, Justin Robbins. I think he's in sunny St. George.
He's
burning hot St. George right now.
Mm-hmm.
And our champion level, Shadon Freya Robinson and Andrew Baird. Thank you guys.
Thank you all so much. We couldn't do this without you. It does us such a heartfelt service to thank you for all that you're doing. And prepare for another bonus episode. I think you guys are going to like today's episode. I won't want to tease it too much because we got some stuff to get into, but thank you. Patreon.com/addicttothathlete helps get you in the bullpen. And it does help us push this out further. Marissa, lots of interesting things you and I have seen over the last couple of months, specifically with private practice therapy and some team concerns. And I've noticed this ever since the pandemic, and it's been something that we've talked about on the podcast, but I want to take a deeper dive into feelings of loneliness. I've gotten a few questions from a few folks about why do I feel like I'm still alone even when I'm surrounded by people. Loneliness is one of these interesting emotions that is kind of challenging to describe because if you think about it, right? Like right now, I could feel very lonely, even though I'm sitting next to you,
Yeah.
or even though that we're married, even though we have family and stuff
It really is something within our mind,
within our
perception.
minds. And so it's kind of an interesting thing because when you look at the surface, so many times there's folks out there that are struggling with this feeling that are surrounded by loving, caring people. So it's like, well, then how am I getting caught and drifted into this emotional corner when I should understand that I have so much support around me, right?
Yeah.
It's that feeling of disconnect.
Mhm.
And recovery in and of itself can be a lonely road. I mean, we know this,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Oh, yeah.
once you start changing some of the attributes and behaviors that have sustained relationships, even though they've been based off of false pretenses,
Yeah.
right?
Well, it's just
It's still a relationship.
losing those connections and losing those friendships that you used to have and trying to avoid some of those unhealthy, connections it's hard. And so, yeah, you start feeling lonely and not feeling like you're really in recovery yet to have new connections, let alone those new friendships and relationships take time to build, right?
Mhm. Absolutely. And this is why I always find it like amazing when we have new people that come onto the team that maybe have walked that road by themselves for a long
Mhm.
time. And what I've noticed too is that those who have to isolate themselves away from the negative folks and the negative behaviors that kept them stuck,
Yeah.
um, there are times when you can use that as an immense strength. You know what I
Yeah.
mean by that?
Yeah.
Like those who follow their own paths, they'll truly discover their full potential if they'll focus first and foremost on themselves and not what they don't have. I think the
Yeah.
feelings of loneliness is an outward projection of what we think we're missing or we don't have.
Oh,
Does that
for
make
sure.
sense?
Yeah, for sure. Because I know a lot of people, I've known elderly people that are kind of homebound and feel very lonely, but the understanding now that they have social media and Facebook and FaceTime, all of a sudden they're not lonely at all.
Yeah.
But other people could have people around them and feel very disconnected and lonely because of that too. So it really is a perception, and what's in our own mind's eye.
I agree with you. So, and I love this. I talk about this a lot. I learned this from David Clark about becoming one with yourself before one with anything or anyone else.
Yeah.
That can absolutely be a lonely road to travel.
Yeah.
Because so many times, you guys got to remember, in addiction and in some mental health concerns and issues, we isolate ourselves to the point where we build these walls around ourselves,
Mhm.
and we don't realize that the time we spend in there also passes on the outside. And one day we wake up and we're like, "Dang,
Yeah.
where is everyone?"
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and that reminds me a little bit. Years ago, I used to take you've been on a few of my trips, but
Mhm.
used to take, at-risk youth, backpacking, and at the end of those trips, we would always have them do a solo experience. Never too long either. Some people do solos for months or weeks, but we would just do a couple hours, and I remember one, young girl, we left for maybe 2 hours at most,
Yeah, the
and
solo episodes. Mhm.
by the time we went to go and pick her up, she was in tears. She looked scared to death, like she had written help in the sand. She thought we had really left her. Um, and I feel so bad that yeah. But she had never what she understood, she never really became one with herself either. She always had people around. She always had headphones in. She always had something to distract her, even if she was lonely or alone, quote unquote, she always had distractions. And it's so important if you're trying to really work on yourself to learn how to connect with yourself, to
Mhm.
just be with yourself. In fact, we just finished recording a podcast with Linda Quirk, and she mentioned some of that. And I
Yeah.
love that about just being with herself, and even running long distances often helped cut out everything. She wouldn't even have thoughts. And that was so healing to her to be able to just be with herself and then be able to give back and connect with other people and have something bigger. Because, yeah, if we're still struggling and feeling alone, even when we have people around us, maybe there's some internal work that needs
Mhm.
to be done.
Yeah. And I think sometimes too, we're afraid to be with our own thoughts that way. I mean, that's one reason for the longest time I would, and to this day, I still do it quite often is like earbuds in, listening to podcasts, books, all
Mhm.
kinds of stuff. And it's times when all that stuff's taken out and it's, the uncomfortable silence. I think
Yeah.
sometimes it gets even my mind like, I got to look inward a little bit. What causes the fear of being alone or feeling that way?
Yeah.
I think there are some common factors to this. I mean, a lot of it's our social conditioning, a lot of it's our self-esteem,
Yeah.
and it could be even past abandonment issues. I mean, that's one of my
For
core
sure.
issues was abandonment, and so
Yeah.
and neglect. And so when you look at some of those factors, it's like being alone uh, can be overwhelming.
Yeah.
As a extrovert introvert myself, it's been kind of funny because I love being around people, but I really, dare I say, covet the alone time.
Mhm.
But it's my choosing. Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
Oh,
I
yeah.
choose that.
Mhm.
There are those out there that don't have it.
Well, and sometimes that's how you re-energize yourself, is being able to, like, so that you have time and stuff to give other people, is being able to take that time to, kind of recharge by yourself.
Yeah, I like that. When we embrace the fact that, we're getting and achieving and learning real respect for ourselves alone, then we can kind of start paying that forward with those who come into our lives by choice. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
Mhm.
Like, you can be at peace alone, but you've got to get congruent with yourself. And there are sometimes, this is one of the things that was interesting about the steps when, I was, working with youth that attended the 12 steps is
Yeah.
there's this one step talking about making a fearless moral inventory of yourself. And that usually put the brakes on most people's experience because it was one of the earlier steps. I think it's like 4 or 5.
Mhm.
And the funny thing about that is treatment kind of buggered that stuff up because when you're in treatment, you have time to do step 1, step 2, step
Yeah.
3. By the time you get to step 4, it's about 90 days into your program and you're out of there if you even get that many days.
Yeah.
And so people get this this step where you make a fearless moral inventory of themselves. And I would read them and they were just emotional dumps of all the bad stuff. And I'm like,
Yeah.
it says fearless moral inventory of yourself, not list all the bad attributes.
Yeah.
Very few people, if any, ever put the positive aspects of themselves.
Yeah.
So
And
when we're alone,
inventory,
we're our
yeah,
worst critics.
is everything. Inventory is everything. It's not just asking us to write down all the bad things we've done. And when you get stuck on that, that can really just drag you down.
Absolutely. And so when I would bring it to him though, and I'd say like, you're not understanding the assignment, right?
Mhm.
Where's the positive stuff? It was the hardest thing for them to do
Yeah.
because when you're alone, your mind kind of typically drifts into that negative mindset. I mean, it is a natural ability for humans to drift into the negative.
Oh, yeah.
It is quite the opposite to train yourself to see the positive. I mean, it's survival of the fittest, it's
Yeah,
self-preservation,
that's how we stay alive, right?
the primitive brain.
Mhm.
And so, can you imagine how hard it would be after a lifetime of just negativity and like downtrodden feelings that now all of a sudden you're going to look in the mirror and try to see the beauty that is you,
Yeah.
you know? Specifically, if you've had to rely on other people that probably manipulated you. Does
Yeah.
that make sense?
Well, and just trusting other people to give you that validation, that external source of validation, whether it's positive or negative,
Mhm.
and not having that internal locus of control and being able to really assess, where am I at? Who am I? What are some behaviors I show that identify some of my morals, some of my values, without other people telling me or doing things for me,
Yeah.
you know?
So if you look at it, listeners, the one thing that's kind of interesting that I've noticed is that to build relationships, there are 3 kind of components to this. If you want to be in a relationship by which you can feel equal and you can feel as though it's maturing and growing into something good and strong, there are 3 attributes. The first one is you need to be seen, right?
Yeah.
And being seen is more than like the avatar, I see you, right? It's
Yeah.
like I know where you are. I see the value. I see the worth, the
Yeah.
spirituality,
Connecting
the
on a deeper
connections.
level. Yeah.
Absolutely. And so we want to be seen, right? The next attribute that's is pretty awesome is we want to be heard
Yeah.
because our voice matters. Our opinions, our thoughts, our impressions, we want to share those things.
Yeah.
So if we're seen and we're heard, then the last attribute is almost, congruent with the 2, and that's to be understood, to know,
Yeah.
where that person's coming from and know
The
who they
other
are.
people can see and know and then understand you. So there is that deeper,
Absolutely. So then
connection.
if you're beginning this process and you're feeling this loneliness, how do you create those attributes in yourself to see yourself to hear yourself and to understand yourself. This is a hard one for most people, Marissa, because I've told you about this. We've talked about it a million times on the podcast.
Yeah.
We feel about our recovery in our life tenfold more than we ever think about our recovery in our lifestyle. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We don't think about it. We feel about it. And it's buggered a lot of this process up.
Yeah.
So when you look at it on a personal level, how do you see yourself? Because we're our own worst critics. How do you look in the mirror and see authentically who you are? That question shook me to the core. You have no idea who you are. My therapist, I'm like, dude, F you. That doesn't make any sense. But the magnitude of that question, it's always been present in my life. To see yourself, like, how do we open our eyes to see ourselves? I mean, there's that old homework assignment I gave my clients. You've done this, where you go to the mirror and you spend 5 minutes looking into your own eyes and not break eye contact, but for 5 minutes. That is the longest 5 minutes of your life. It's why do you think that's so hard to see yourself?
Well, because I think you do see usually first you see that negative and the bad, and that's why people want to just stop and go away from it. Let alone in life, we just have so much distraction. We have so much, helping others. And if you're a parent, you have kids and a job and trying to do all these other things that you don't really cut out those distractions and really focus on you. And so people give up. And so because it's hard and it hurts and it's, to do that is like really opening up ourselves to that negative. And then if you can hold on long enough, that's when you start seeing and start connecting with more of the positive stuff inside of yourself.
Yeah. It's one of the hardest things to do, actually begin to see you for who you are, and we're good manipulators, but when it boils down to the brass tacks, we buy into our own lies, we're in trouble. Right. And so when you start seeing yourself for those negative attributes, like we talked about with that list, you've also got to see the good, the potential, the authority that's inside of you as well. And that's not easy to do because most people will shy away from that. There's another group I do where you have to list 5 things that you love, 5 people that are close to you, and so on and so forth. But one of those is 5 things about yourself that you absolutely adore and love. Yeah. And that's always the hardest for people to do. I like my eyes, I like my hair, right?
Yeah.
And it's kind of a funny thing because it's like, if we don't become one with ourselves, how can we become one with others? If we don't feel confident in who we are, how can we do that with others?
Yeah.
We spend so much time avoiding ourselves that I think when we have the time and opportunity to do it, we're kind of at a loss.
Yeah.
Right.
Oh, yeah.
Seeing yourself. This was a hard one for me because other people would say, "Blue, you have so much potential." And to me, I never liked that because I'm like, well, of course you have to say that, or yeah, right. Easy for you to say.
Or what does that really mean?
Yeah. But what does it mean? It means that I have to do the work, because if I do the work, there's some amazing things that can happen, and damn, it wasn't easy.
No.
I mean, it's not easy. But when you're looking at yourself, so I like Brock Bevel when he talks a little bit about his awakening to his addiction, when he shut the mirror and he saw himself, he saw where he was, he looked behind him and saw where he was standing, and he's like, this is not who and where I'm supposed to be.
Yeah.
The next one is listening to yourself, to hear yourself, right? To truly understand that my thoughts, my best actions got me right here. Right? To hear yourself. What am I saying to myself?
Yeah. What are those internal thoughts? What are those things? And what are the things that maybe we've adopted from someone else? Are there things that we've just started saying to ourselves because other people said them? And if so, what are they? Sit down and being able to assess that and have that self-awareness it takes time. It takes, because there's things that we can just mentally block out. If things are too hard and we don't want to see it, we just block it out. And that's again a survival instinct. So how do you get those blockades away so that you can really assess what are the things that you think and what are the thoughts that go through your head that are negative or self-deprecating self-deprecating, or the things that you just need to assess again.
Yeah, and it's a hard one because then you have to question some of your own beliefs.
Yeah, reevaluate.
And more often than not, the belief systems that we take on board typically are from outside sources. They very rarely come from us. And until we're mature enough to actually question ourselves, we'll never be able to feel the magnitude of what a change of mind and heart could be. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
When you're so downtrodden because people are calling you pathetic or a low life or, a basket case, whatever, you're going to believe it because you have no evidence at that time to weigh it with.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and usually most cases we are young and we look to parents, we look to caregivers as the one that tells us who we are. And so when those are negative things, then that's even worse because then that's what we believe. That's what we just internalize, and we never think of even trying to reevaluate that.
Yeah. And I've heard this a lot lately in family therapy and individual counseling where people have invested their entire lives to someone, and they have gotten garbage in return, serving them without question, making sure that everything was provided. And it got me thinking that those kind of relationships are hard to wrap your head around, because what it boils down to is that you came into their life to understand and follow through with unadulterated love and compassion and service.
Yeah.
They came into your life for self-service. That's a hard one to swallow when you think about it.
Yeah.
Right? They're serving themselves while you're serving them. Yeah. How fair is that? It's not.
Yeah.
It is absolutely not. And it's not an is what it is either.
Yeah.
What is it? It's look at what you've done with your life. Look at, without question, you served out of your inconvenience. You loved out of your inconvenience. And the person didn't understand the magnitude of who you were, what you did, what you brought.
Yeah. And maybe there were those many, many years that you didn't recognize that was even happening. But now that you do know, how can you do better to respect yourself and to have connections with individuals that are willing to give back to you as well?
So you got to listen to yourself. The person that knows you the best is you. But if you're ignoring the other side of the coin, then you're at fault. And it's a hard thing to say, because if you, again, list all your bad attributes, but you don't see the positive stuff,
that's what you'll default to.
That's what you'll default to.
Yeah.
And it's hard because we're conditioned. Again, conditioning is kind of one of these things where you're told so many times that you begin to believe it, right?
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And the next one is to be understood. Now, this is I think a lifetime pursuit for most people as they look inward to kind of figure out who they are, where they stand, and what they're about. But to understand yourself, I think that's a growing kind of mindset that needs to be really, I think, tapped into frequently.
Yeah.
To understand, why am I doing this? When I first started to understand that my behaviors, my addictions came from a core issue, I had to begin to understand why. What happened, right?
Yeah.
And it boiled down to some pretty significant trauma.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, so now that I understand that these are the things that I'm doing because of these feelings and I've connected them, what right do I have now to keep doing that negative stuff? Because now I know.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? So if I'm looking at neglect as a core issue, and I know what it is now, the opposite of neglect is connection.
Yeah.
So do I stay pushing people away and self-sabotaging? That's stupidity.
Yeah.
I need to fill that void now with connections, and I need to start to trust myself and others. And by understanding those principles, guess what happens? Family, relationships, careers, experiences.
And
right?
It's like you said, then you start having some of those seen, heard, and understood by yourself and then by others. And if you are having relationships with people that aren't seeing you, hearing you, or understanding you, maybe you need to reevaluate those relationships, because it's not going to change overnight. It's not going to get better. Mostly, many times you've talked about, if this is, say, a family relationship and it just continues to happen over and over and over, maybe you have a conversation. But if they're not willing to do anything or change how they interact with you, then maybe you need to separate. If it's not going to bring you up either, then, It's not safe to be around either.
It's the classic thing that I thought of years ago, after my own experience with my mom, about it's a privilege to have a relationship with me. It's not a right. And that falls on some people's hearts and ears differently.
Mhm.
Some people think, well, that's a pompous thing to say.
Mhm.
Who do you think you are? Well, who do I think I'm not? I mean, I'm not going to,
Yeah.
I'm not going to invest in people that don't care about me.
Yeah.
I wish that those relationships were better, but guess what? I'm going to create my own opportunities and invest in people that I know are going to receive me and give things back.
Well, and it's having that perspective too, that it's a privilege for you to have a relationship with others, not a right.
100%. Yeah.
Whether
Good
it's your
point.
kids and other people. So it goes both ways. It's not just, oh, I'm the special one here, but it's like anyone, it's a privilege to have a relationship with, and we need to respect that and have others respect us in return.
I truly don't believe people think that way,
Mhm.
and I mean, it took me 20, almost 30 plus years to figure that out. But if you look at the magnitude of that statement, like, I've heard in individual therapy, just horrific stories
Yeah.
of parent-child relationships, the horrible things that some parents do. I mean, I've been privy to, I've lived through some of that.
Yeah.
And it blows my mind that that is the way that they think relationships should exist. Like, from manipulating their children to saying horrible things without realizing the consequences, right?
Yeah. And how
Something as
detrimental it could be.
something as like, I'm worried about my kid overeating, so I'm going to start restricting it. But what happens is you start these weird little kind of side comments of like, oh, you shouldn't eat that, right?
Yeah. And then you're sending some undertones to your child of something's wrong with me,
Mhm.
and I don't make good choices, and I'm not good unless,
Yeah.
and I'm not loved unless, and that's
So
dangerous.
So what do? Well, you invest in it, right? You don't just armchair cowboy it. You've got to invest in it. It's like, hey, I'm trying this. Do you want to try this too? Or like, hey, we're gonna go for a bike ride. Do you want to come? No. Well, I really want you to. Come on, let's just go and make it fun. Make it an invitation.
Yeah.
And if that doesn't work, you find your connection. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Your agenda doesn't matter anymore. Your agenda now is to serve and parent out of your inconvenience again.
Yeah. And again, maybe it's just spending time with them. It's not going to be doing anything to change the way they eat, the way they, but get to know your child.
Absolutely.
And where they're at.
And that's hard because we have 4 of the little buggers,
Mhm.
and they all have very different emotional approaches, right?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
One you can joke around with, one you even say, how you doing? And she freaks out. I mean, like,
And not only that, but it changes over time as you're going through teenage years. And, we had our youngest just turned into a teenager, feels like almost overnight. And it's like a whole different dynamic of how we
all of a sudden he's moody and he stinks and
we have to interact with
yeah.
him is so different than it used to be even 6 months ago.
Mm-hmm. So as us, we could convince him that the way he is right now is wrong, and we want him to go back to where he was.
Yeah.
But he can't. That is unfair for us to even ask or require.
Yeah.
Why? Because that period of time has passed now. Now we get to learn how to love, work with, experience this new one. And the cool part about it is it's all still there.
Yeah.
And it's how we react. So those factors of being seen, being heard, and being understood, those are factors for any relationship that you want. But again, if you neglect yourself in those same attributes, you're not going to be able to progress in becoming one with yourself, right?
Yeah.
So focusing on yourself, right? The hard truth is you can't control a lot of the outside factors, but the one thing you can do is produce and create and develop time to focus on yourself, to give yourself the allotted time that you need to focus on your needs.
Yeah. Like we said, sometimes you do that when you have your alone time to be able to like recuperate and recharge, and to have some assessment time and what am I doing and what do I like, what do I need to change, and then trying again. But you've got to take that time.
Yeah. And with this, Linda, the podcast we just recorded, that's why it's so fresh on our minds. She said some amazing things about understanding your fear, knowing what those thresholds are. If something scares you, you need to lean into it. It's another factor. It's the whole concept of, what you resist the most is what causes your suffering. Right. And so usually that's a fear-based thing. Like, I'm afraid of this conversation. I'm afraid of asking for this help.
And maybe that's what you need to look into and
For
do the
sure,
most.
because
Yeah.
it causes your suffering, right? So if you can understand the fear and the anxieties behind some of these behaviors, you can start understanding that those are the things I need to lean into. Like a case in point, let's say that you're not used to, challenging authority, but you really need a pay increase. Every fiber in your being is going to say, I'll just wait until the next bump, and pray and hope that it comes up with cost of living. Or you can lean into it and say, I'm a good employee. I show up. And if they say no, that's okay.
Yeah.
Because I could even go somewhere else. I remember when I took my own advice about this, Marissa. It was the funniest thing about understanding this. I used to teach this all the time to my athletes and clients back at the county days. And it was kind of a miserable job. We've talked about it on here. I loved it, but there were some people in there that just
by the end. Management changed.
I got thinking, do you want to have financial security or financial freedom? Do you want to have job security or job, freedom? And it hit me. I'm like, I'm sitting here preaching all this stuff to these folks, but I'm afraid to take that next move because there was a job that was open and offered, but I'm like, I don't think so. Right.
Yeah.
And it hit me like, dude, you've got to take your own advice. If you're fearful of this, you need to lean into it. Now, if it was something I didn't want, that'd have been different, but I was afraid to leave. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And why are you being held back, and also held back to something that isn't serving you anymore, that you don't enjoy, that you would come home from work just angry and frustrated, and you know what I mean? And like, well, then maybe a change needs to happen, even though that is scary.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I asked Linda the same thing. I'm like, you've done all these races, you've run every continent, you've even ran in Antarctica. What the heck?
Yeah.
I'm like, what's next? She's like, there's a challenge out there for me, and it's out there somewhere, and I'll find it. Because if it makes you, I mean, she said she bungee jumped in New Zealand.
Yeah. Because she was always afraid of it.
Yeah. And I'm like, that is amazing, because I've held myself back out of fear and anxiety because of the unknown.
Yeah.
So I think you need to question your own blueprint, right? You've got to question your own blueprint of like, maybe this building I'm trying to create here isn't quite what I need.
Yeah. And redrawing that blueprint. What is it that maybe I could reassess and change and shift and, try differently, or bring in other people that could maybe help me in a different way. Yeah.
And by doing so comes the concepts of letting go of the what was, letting go of your past, knowing that it's there and it was there for a reason. And it was a necessary step for you to be where you are, but it doesn't mandate anymore who you are, right? It was a means to an end. It was an experience to be had. Hopefully you can use it as a learning experience, but you've got to move away from it at a certain point.
I just heard something the other day, kind of talking about that, when you have to like shift and change, and it's like, well, was I going the wrong direction then? And they described it in being related to like GPS, like they say, turn left on Center Street, and you're going on Center Street, and then all of a sudden it's quick turn right. Okay, does that mean Center Street was wrong? No, because it got you to that quick turn right. You needed to be there to take your next step.
Yeah.
So don't always question where you've been, but maybe assessing where it is you need
where
to
you're
go
going
again.
Absolutely. And expanding your social networks, your tribe, your team is crucial, because your willingness to step up into a new situation, a new group of people, one that has similar likes and understandings.
Yeah.
That is your ticket to success. You surround yourself with great people, you yourself will experience great things.
Yeah.
Right. And I don't think we do that. Again, if you're so used to flying solo, you're probably worried about that. You'd be amazed about how welcome you could be if you just had that 5 seconds of courage to walk through the door.
Yeah.
And by doing so, you have to raise your personal emotional standards.
Very true.
That's a hard one.
Yeah.
Because if you're going to hold yourself accountable, you need to really let go of the stuff that you just let slide.
Yeah.
Being called names, being called addicts, being called, pathetic. You've got to let that stuff go. You got to raise your standards.
And that may be uncomfortable.
It will
be uncomfortable. And so the second we're uncomfortable, we want to go back to the way it was, the way we were, the way we understand and know. But that's not the way we grow,
And I've heard this a lot, raising your standards, specifically in relationships. I've always talked to people who have had some pretty hefty backgrounds say to me, who's going to want to be with someone that's been so broken.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think about that statement? Like this, like my background, listeners, was rough. I mean, addiction, abuse, poverty, all this kind of stuff. I felt very broken. Who was I to think that I could build a relationship with someone like Marissa, like with you? I mean, and I felt that way, way out of my league. I'm like, this is not going to happen because of where I've been, who I am, what I've done.
Well, and to me, I never was looking at your past. And once I knew and understood it, all it did is help me understand the person you are now. But that says nothing about the future.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not what I mean, if we're going to have a relationship and friendship or anything else, it's future, it's not the past.
Mm-hmm.
And, obviously, if there's some real negative behaviors, you need to be aware of that. That's helpful for, again, the future, but it's not the past. So that's what it's about, is assessing what is to come.
And I had to raise my standards. I had to start looking at what my standards truly were. Is being dishonest a positive standard in life? No, it wasn't. It was being open and mature and, and relationship focused. Yes.
Yeah.
And there were some things that I let go of that I thought I could never let go of, and, I hear this kind of stuff. And I also think there are people out there that probably say, well, yeah, Blue, conceited you are, like, I am who I am. If you can't accept me for who I am, you'll never accept me for who I can be. That is limited thinking.
Yeah.
And it's giving you an opportunity to just take a knee and anchor yourself.
Yep.
Right. Because there are potentials out there, like we talked about, that I hate because I didn't think I could achieve them.
Yeah.
And so if you're limiting yourself by saying, I am who I am, that's great. But who else could you be? What else could you become?
And, who wants to just be who they are forever and always?
And if you want to, that's fine.
I mean, that's fine.
But you're going to miss.
There's always things I
life.
could be learning and improving on and getting better. And that's opens me to new experiences. And so I, don't want to settle.
Yeah. I've seen this a lot too. And it's not about becoming a goody-goody, right? It's about becoming one with yourself again. I've seen people whose standards have been, so questionable that they drive drunk and they end up getting in accidents or having problems and taking lives.
Yeah.
And I can guarantee you that they all sit back in whatever jail cell they're in after having been convicted of manslaughter or what have you. And they're like, shoot, I wish my standards would have been a little higher. And for the majority of you, that stuff will never happen. But it'll always take away from something else. You can't be a recreational drug user and pretend like you have everything made. It doesn't work that way. It has to.
Something has to give.
Something has to give. I'm sorry. It's just the way that it is. If you're occupying your time with substance use and drinking and you work the weekend so that you can get drunk and plaster yourself, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities.
Any choice we make puts us on a new path and a new road. And that means it cuts out the other roads that we're leaving behind. And so that's just what it is. It doesn't matter in any scenario. We cut out other options when we make a choice.
Absolutely. So, 1 in 5 of you out there right now listening to this are experiencing loneliness in one way, shape, or form. And so I hope this is kind of helping. And maybe it's you listening right now. And if that's the case, take what we say with stride, jump on this team, expand your social network, take some time to see yourself, hear yourself, and understand yourself.
Yeah. Connect with yourself so that then you can start reaching out and having real, genuine connections with others.
Absolutely. So as always, I want to thank you all for listening. This will be now produced into a podcast for your listening pleasure. We'd love to have you share this with anyone who might be feeling a little bit lonely or maybe a little bit isolated, or for you to use the principles in here to help navigate some of that troubled waters that you might find yourself in, and reach out to us. Addictathlete.org has all of our contact information. It has our team store for merchandise, get some stuff to out there and show solidarity through running. I would love to jump on and register for our upcoming 5K. It's the proxy run that coincides with National Recovery Month in September. We'd love to have you come out here to Spanish Fork, Utah to run with us, or wherever you are to run virtual. And to show solidarity through that too. We have quite a few folks that have created some little subgroups of Addict to Athlete to run this race specifically. Registration is now open, addictathlete.org. It's a great healing experience.
Yes.
So look that up, addictathlete.org under events, right?
It's under, there is a link there, but we also have a races tab, and then it's the
There you
annual
go.
5K.
On the race tab. Boom, right there.
Yep.
But as always, listeners and athletes out there, do your best. I know you're striving for great things. It'll help you turn your mess into a very powerful and strong message. I'll exit stage left.
All right.